Hi guys, we are coming together today to talk about supporting students after instruction, remediation, different types of remediation. Is it for summative grades? Is it for filling in gaps? So we're going to do a little PowerPoint to do this, and I've made you a remediation form. So on it, it has areas that you can take notes when you're in your groups, which we're going to do here shortly, so that you can answer questions, put notes down, add data. Later, we're going to go back to our content teams because we're in full 8th grade team now, and you're going to go back into your content teams to be able to come back later and discuss other data that you've received on your individual students within your content. So then you can talk to your content, other content teachers, math to science, science to language arts, different things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and have you get your forms and look over them for a moment. And my clicker is not charged, so we are going to have to do this from the computer. So, why do students struggle? So we're going to take our remediation form and we're going to work in groups of 4 to develop and categorize a list of possible reasons for the following. So even after you have supported students prior to your lessons, provided them with targeted intervention during the lessons, you still have a handful of students who do not understand the concepts and still do not demonstrate mastery on those required skills. So I'm going to let y'all brainstorm for a few minutes, and then we're going to go back to our PowerPoint and discuss different ways that we can look at it. So your form is going to look like this. On here, you're going to, let's go ahead and turn the lights out. Okay, you have academic, so this is just for academic use for the remediation, and over here is remediation for behavior and management. Okay, so just brainstorm and put some items down on here for things that you know your students struggle academically and things that behavior-wise that we may be able to work on or are causing students not to have those mastery skills. Okay, so what is remediation? Acceleration was offered before students started the unit of study. Interventions were offered during the instruction. Remediation is an opportunity to provide additional support to those students who are still not understanding those key concepts. It is very important that we look at remediation different than those interventions that we look at inside the classroom. Okay, so we have 2 types of remediation. Short-term remediation is designed to get students ready for summative assessments. Those are like at the end of a unit where you go back over things that you began at the beginning, or at the end of the year when we have to take our SOLs, and especially with all of us 8th graders, all 8th grade teachers have an SOL this year. So at the end, you're remediating what comes from the complete beginning of the year through the end of the year. And science is also adding in 6th and 7th grade. Then we have the one that we're probably going to focus more on. Ongoing remediation focuses on that long-term skill development to address large gaps in backgrounds, knowledge, or basic skills. So a lot of our students have gaps within where they're at in their learning process, so we have to fill those gaps. Or even within a unit, they get this portion of it, this content, but they don't get this content. So all remediation, though, is one thing that we need to understand is it is going to always be outside of the classroom. Remediation does not take effect within the classroom. Those are our intervention skills. It is also part of our new year. This year is discussing that with our parents, that they have remediation time when they need to retest. So it's part of our syllabuses this year. So let's go from there. And we're going to talk about what do you remediate. So we know the 2 categories. So what do we actually remediate? You're not going to remediate everything that you taught. Skills taught again later in units, or nice to knows that are not essential to the mastery or not on summative or the SOLs. Material that makes up a substantial part of the assessment, content or skills. So it's just our content, our standards-based learning. So we want to focus on that standards-based learning. material that is critical to the next unit or later units. So if you have an item in math that they need to be able to do later, you're going to focus on that so that they'll be stronger with it in your later unit. Specific contents with which students struggle on. As the years go on and you get better at teaching, you know every year that this unit is one that the students struggle on. So fractions in 6th grade, I know that they struggle on. So you're going to focus on how you're going to remediate that situation. Okay, who do you remediate? Okay, you are always analyzing formative assessments within your classroom. Your classwork, your quick checks, you go around as you are facilitating in your classroom, and you're checking those things. You know which one of your students are struggling. You're going to determine those that are also close to mastery. They're getting it sometimes, but not all the time. So you want to get those that are sitting on the line. Determine who needs intensive. So is it that student that never gets anything? So they're going to need a little bit more versus those students that are just close to mastery. Students who struggle with the context, and that's going to be our test structure. So SOL plays a big role in that, and some of our summative tests where we're using those in IA, we know that that plays a big role. It's the verbiage. So how do you remediate them being able to understand a question within a standardized test? So sometimes they're not written the same way we write them in our classrooms. So we've got to make sure that we're focused on, they know the content, but they don't understand the question being asked. So that's one of the other ones that we're going to talk about remediating. Okay, so selecting remediation. Again, now we're going to go back to our groups again, and we're going to follow. We're going to read over this and discuss it within your groups. Selecting. So we're going to break up into our groups now, and we're going to spend a few more minutes on discussing those, and then we're going to go through different ones that you might want to add to your list as we go through our PowerPoint. Okay, go ahead and start. Okay guys, let's get back together. Thank you. So we're going to move on to different strategies from here. So let's look at error analysis. Did any group have error analysis?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so different ways that you can do an error analysis. Have students review first assessments to analyze errors, test talks, determine the present cause of those errors. So have those students figure out what it is they've got to do. Determine how to prevent the errors in the future. What can they do? Is it an organizational skill, or is it they're not reading the question properly, which goes back to that context. Students should present an error analysis before they can retest. So that is one way to get them, strategy to get them doing it. So another one, we're going to go into reteach, which all of us do all the time. Nothing real new, but let's get some new focuses. Teachers' concepts that students don't understand in a different way. Teach it. So now, instead of doing it with a graphic organizer, teach that concept in a different and complete way that you've not done in class before. Focus only on the key concepts and the skill that the student is lacking. Okay? Reteaching should occur shortly after the assessment, not a week or two later. It should be with that feedback right after you do your error analysis. So make sure that you do it with prompt feedback. Teachers should be different than a regular instruction. So that's going to be new to us. And that's one that I'd like us to try and focus on. So we have teams of 3 for the most part. We have 3 science teachers, 3 math teachers, 3 language arts teachers, and 3 math teachers. So when you do your remediation, switch students, okay? Because you may say it differently than they do. Set up your schedule when you go back to your content CLTs and think about what kind of scheduling you would like to do. We all do the same, a summative test, so you're remediating on the exact same skills. this should not be creating additional work for the students. They are not to just go home with a package and say, hey, here's your remediation package, redo this, and then come back and retake the test. Well, they couldn't do it to begin with, so how do you think they're going to do on the additional work? Probably the same thing. So it's going to be up to us to do that. So that comes in with our tutoring. Use teachers or even peer tutors. So as you're talking about that reteach and that switching with teachers, think about peer tutoring or even both. Students should help develop specific skills. You should target the learning task which they are struggling on. This should be temporary. They should not be focusing on, okay, I don't have to do any work in class, and then now all of a sudden, okay, I didn't pass my summative, so now we're going to go after school and get one-on-one tutoring with the teacher or a student tutor. That's not the purpose here. The purpose is that we are focusing on those that are meeting and not mastering skills. So that's where we'll look at a few other lists of things. You could have electronic or online tutors. I know that one of our math teachers uses online videos for several of his lessons, so the students can go back and listen to that. Do test talk, which we talked about, test analysis, and test revision, which also falls into that test analysis. So, additional practice. So again, kind of goes back to that, let's not just hand them a packet to redo something, because they probably don't know how to do it to begin with, so it's not a drill and a kill. Practice should focus on helping the students develop fluency and proficiency. They should be able to see that flow from one part of your unit to another part of the units. Practice should be distributed over a period of time, not, okay, here's your packet, get it done tonight. Use several different sessions in doing this if need be. It should be meaningful, it should be short, and you should always have that built-in feedback. So you have a session and they've done it, give them that feedback, either that day or in your next session. Okay? Then you have your session, they do a little more work, and you give them feedback. If students don't see the feedback, they're not going to know what they're doing incorrectly, or they're not going to understand what they don't understand. So let's make sure we've included that feedback. Okay, another one that might show up that can be a struggle for students is our organizational and study habits. So if poor performance is due to poor learning habits, the remediation may need to focus on this. It may have nothing to do with the fact that they can't do it. It's they have no idea how to keep their notes. They have no idea how to keep their binders. Working on learning strategies. Okay, do you use graphic organizers all the time? Do you bring your supplies to class? Do you use your supplies when you're in class? Okay, teach them how to use those graphic organizers. Don't just say, oh, okay, and assume that everyone knows how to use a graphic organizer. Allow them to retake the assessments after they have applied the new strategies. Okay, so once again, once you see, okay, they've gone home and they've made sure all their notes are in order and they understand that, you know, if I do this work and turn in this is going to feed into, they're going to see within your parent portal, they're going to see, okay, I didn't do this work and didn't turn it in and I have a 0 or an NHI on it. And now I've taken the summative assessment and I didn't pass. So, of course, they're going to see that relationship there. So it's important that we teach them organizational and study habits. I know we're in 8th grade and our kids should already know how to do that. But believe it or not, there's many of us, even as teachers, that struggle with our own organizational skills. So keep that in mind when you are doing things with your students, that you want to be aware that, you know, they just may not understand it. Okay, so then we move from organization to behaviors. Sometimes it's a lack of motivation. Sometimes it's a short attention span, easily distracted. Absences in our school, very common thing. We run that a lot. Low self-esteem or just acting out. That's where us as teachers, we get back to our core strategies that we had to do last year. and you are understanding that you need to make a relationship with your students. Find out what's going on. Why are they lack of motivation? Make sure you're calling parents and making that contact with them. Find out why they're absent. Why are they acting out? Are there things going on at home? And if that doesn't help, you need to add in counseling. So add in those counselors that can help us be better at what we do. So we want to make sure we're doing that. So behaviors is a part of that. Different ways that we can address those. Okay, alternative instructions. So match students with best learning style. How do they learn? Are they tactile? Are they kinetic learners? Are they oral learners? So make sure you're understanding how your students learn. How do they learn best? Hands-on versus lecture. Of course, even for us right now, we've had a couple of group things, but standing here all day long and talking to your students is not going to be the best. So make sure we're doing some hands-on. It also allows you to facilitate. We know that. Working with a partner or small groups. As we did some small groups. Have your students do small groups. We know talking, listening, doing all help that. Break your information down into small learning targets and teach small chunks at a time. So with our standards-based learning, we are doing more of that chunking and doing just targeted learning. So when we have our information on the board that we tell our students every day, we are doing PS1A and we're talking about lab safety. They know all day long that that's what they're learning, okay? That they're not getting 5 concepts in one and trying to separate them out. So, but you're going to do that also in your remediation, okay? Reassessing. After providing the correct action, providing the corrective action, so we know what's going on, reassess to improve learning, not grades. Okay? Our purpose here is not that they get an A on a report, on a summative test. It's that they can actually use the information that you've given them. What is the skill that you want them to be able to use? Reassess only when it helps the students learn information they need to move on. Okay? So if they don't, as we said earlier in our slides, if they don't need that, don't reassess it. Move to the targets that you know that they're going to need for later, for the SOL, for other units, for later courses. In our physical science class, they have a lot of different areas that they have to know for them to be able to do chemistry when they get to high school. And if you are missing those pieces, it makes it very hard for them. Okay? And I know you hear that math and language arts, you hear that constantly when the 6th grade teachers are doing one thing and then they get to 8th grade and they say, we never did that in 6th grade. Reassess as close to the original assessment as possible, which we discussed that also. That feedback is important. Give them feedback, allow them to be remediated, and then reassess shortly thereafter. Otherwise, they're just going to fall further behind. Okay, so your content teams. During your meeting, you're going to go back to your content teams with this information. I hope you've gotten a lot of information down. You're going to list strategies that you have used already. You're going to prepare your new data with your students that you know, and you're going to talk to your content team. What area or what strategy and what area is going to go together. Then we're going to come back to our PLC and discuss common students and new data. So it's going to be important that in your content teams that you bring those students back, and we're going to say, okay, we have language arts. Which students in your language arts are struggling? Do we have any common ones in math and civics and science? So that way we can look at that data and we can see, okay, are they struggling across the board or are they just struggling in one content? And that will prepare us to look at different strategies. So what did math do to remediate? What did language arts do to remediate? What did civics do to remediate? And which one were they successful with? So we're going to take some of these new strategies and make sure that we are getting those passed off to our other grade level team teams also, so that, you know, we're doing different strategies that are going to work for all the students or for one student that's going to work in another class. So let's look at that. Then our last step is going to be going to that intervention team. So we've done all this different remediation, okay? And nothing seems to be working with the students. So next time with our principals meeting, you're going to bring your plan of intervention to it. And you're going to say, you know, to the intervention team, you're going to say, hey, we have this list of students that we have contacted parents. We have done remediation. We've talked about it from one content to the other content. And we're going to use that BARC protocol to discuss an intervention plan above and beyond what we've done in there. And then we're also going to include our counselors when needed. And maybe they will need to move from intervention 1 to intervention 2, and we may need to reassess in other areas. And that includes academic and behavior. So we're going to wrap this up for today, and we're going to come back together next week with our current students that are struggling at the beginning of this first quarter of school, and see what kind of data we have and where we want to move from here, what kind of strategies you're doing. So make sure that you get to your CLTs, which will, you know, most of us have them on Tuesday, correct? And we'll come back together next Thursday, and we'll see where we're going from there. If you have any questions, make sure you see me after this, and we'll discuss some more about it. Thank you.